We've cut our pattern pieces, we've divided our fabric up, and we have 8 beautiful pattern pieces just like this, and a couple of pieces for the sash as well. We have 2 sleeves and 2 bodies. These are what we use to find out the width of the panel pieces to encompass our bodies. So if you have a tan mono, you do not subtract from it. I know you can sing that along with me now. You do not subtract from it. We make the seams a different size to fit the body. The length we're going to measure is called the yuki, and it's from your centre back neck. You can use this though. This is basically your centre back neck. If you went straight through, that's where the centre back seam would be. And we're going to measure from here out to where you would like the garment to fall on your wrist. So this falls a little bit further up my arm. It's very comfortable. It's great for after the bath when you're a bit hot. You don't want it sort of swallowing you. It comes down to about there. And you can want it further along or less. That's up to you. In order to find that measurement, this is called the yuki. The best practice in order to do it, I'll stand up quickly to show you, is to have your arm at a 45-degree angle, like that. And you measure from here down to here. You might need to get someone to help you to do that because it can be a little bit cumbersome trying to work that out. A very similar measurement if you just hold your arm straight out. It's best practice to hold it at 45 degrees, but honestly, if you just hold your arm straight out and measure that, that's fine as well. That is called your yuki. My yuki was 64 centimeters. Half of that is my sleeve and half of that is the body. That's how easy it is. Take the yuki and divide it in half. That is how big you want these pattern pieces to be once sewn. So this is where we adjust the seam allowances. I have enclosed the raw edges here, and that makes the pattern pieces 36 centimeters across. Half of my yuki, which was 64 centimeters, is 32 centimeters. So in order to sew this together, I need to have 32 centimeters from the 36. So 36 minus 32 is 4. And if I want to make the seam allowances, I divide that in half. So I've got a 2 centimeter seam allowance on either side. That's the seam allowance I'd use to sew the whole garment. Easy. Now, that's with these seams enclosed in the way that I close them. If you have a yuki that is much less or more than me, you might want to consider how you enclose the raw edges. If you are making a larger garment, you might consider turning the edges over only once and then carrying on with your seam allowance. Then that's going to give you more room to move. It's going to give you an extra couple of centimeters, an extra inch or so to make your pattern pieces, so they would sit out to about here, and then you're able to do it that way. If you're overlocking, you can just scooch down the edge there, and that will make these pieces wider and it will give you more room to make a larger garment. Also, if you find that your yuki was much smaller than mine, you're very slight, you might want to turn it in larger folds. So make a 1 centimeter, 3/4 inch, and then another 3/4 inch. You might want to take more off so your seam allowances don't have to be as wide. This is a lovely seam allowance. So this is 2 centimeters in. Where am I? Here we go. So 2 centimeters in is about to here, and that's a lovely seam allowance. If you look at that, once that's sewn, that will press back and look absolutely gorgeous. It'll be about that wide. To be honest, I usually turn and enclose my raw edges and then I sew just a couple of mil, so less than 1/8 of an inch, down beside the turned seam. So where you can see the stitching there, I might sew about here. So that's why my garments are always a little bit larger and a little bit looser, and I find that much more comfortable because that's how I wear them. You can see, like, it's falling. I wear them quite loose and over clothes. So I'm not, to be honest, too worried about the Yuki and measuring that myself. I don't need to be that accurate because I know that this fits me, and you can do that as well. The Yuki is used in traditional kimono making because they are making things that have to sit somewhere on the wrist. In a traditional kimono, it has places where it sits. This has to be here, the seam has to be there. Things have to be a certain way because they're wearing them in the traditional method. If you're making a yukata or kimono style garment to wear around the house and for your personal use, you can make it a little bit more with a laissez-faire attitude. I'm going to hold up this. This is the body piece. And this could be from either piece of fabric. This is from the voile, but it could have been the fabric A or fabric B because we now have the same sized fabric. Give or take half an inch or a centimetre. It doesn't matter, and you'll see why in a minute. But here we go. This is the body piece. That's the shoulder mountain, which I have marked, and I will take great care to know where this is. I've talked about that as well at length, haven't I? So, there's a body piece. What we now need to do is we need to finish the raw edges. You do this before you sew the fabric rather than after you sew the fabric. And it might seem a bit of a slug, but the great thing is, because you've done this now, when you go to construct the actual garment and you put all the seams together, after you've sewn a seam, the seam edges are done, the seam finishing is done, and all you have to do is press. It's a great feeling. You feel accomplished and like everything's done because you've done it all now. It's all in the preparation. There are a couple of ways to do this. Now, in the pattern, this is the best way to do it that I have found because of the way that the garment is constructed. You've got the two body pieces, you've got two sleeves and two okumi, and on each side we're going to turn the edges. Before we enclose our raw edges, I'm going to you from the future. You can see I've got all my raw edges done here, and these are the 6 pattern pieces that we do it to. 2 body, there's 2 sleeves, and I've got 2 front overlaps, but I need to talk about the front overlap. The front overlap is a uniform size, usually around 6 inches or 15 centimeters wide, once finished. And you've got 2 interesting parts to this. One is you've got your front opening, so the center front opening, the edge of your garment is here, right there. That's one side of the front overlap. So it's a little different to the other pieces, to the body pieces that we're doing. So you've got the body pieces are done exactly the same. Turn, press, sew in the same manner. The front overlaps, we're turning and pressing and sewing them, but we're measuring it differently. You'll notice that these are quite tiny. Here is the sleeve. This is finished in exactly the same way as the body is finished. And you see it's a 1/4 inch and then a 3/4 inch turn. Have a look at the raw edge enclosure there compared to this one. Now this is because these need to be finished, once they're finished, at around 15 centimeters, 6 inches. So I still need to add a seam allowance to this as well. One side doesn't have a seam allowance, that's the front of the garment, center front opening. The other side does. And this is where we come in. So say I'm going to attach this to the body piece where it attaches. Normally when you're attaching the seam, when you're actually sewing the seams, you line up your 2 edges and sew away. But with this part, you might have to have an uneven seam allowance on either side. So it's something to consider that we are turning this slightly differently. So once this pattern piece is inserted into the garment, there is 15 centimeters or 6 inches between here and here. And remember, you can have it a bit smaller, but it's a uniform size. It doesn't change as much as the body pieces do. It doesn't ebb and flow as much as that with the size of the garment. It's quite a uniform piece, as you saw on the Yukata that I showed earlier, the red and white Yukata. Theirs was about 13 centimeters, which is about 4 or 5. That's about 5 inches, and we're going for about 6. So there's still leeway there, but remember to treat these enclosed edges a little differently and a little narrower when you're going to sew them. Let's carry on. And here is a preview, by the way, of what you're going to end up with. Aren't they beautiful? Look at those edges. Stunning, especially in this fabric. So here we go. This is a great way to show you what we've done. This is the voile, so it's really see-through, and this is why I chose this to make this course, because you can see through the voile. Can you see through? Yeah, you can see there. So I've turned it under 1/2 centimeter, 5 millimeters or 1/4 of an inch, and I've turned it over by 1 centimeter, and it might be a little more, but what I've done is you can see that it's half of it is turned under, and then so it's double what I turned under before, so it's a double turn. And then I sew all the way down with a large stitch, because you're just holding this. What you're doing is basically creating, you're encasing the raw edges and creating the tan mono. So have a look at this. Do you see that? You've got on either side of the tan mono, you've got a selvage, and so this is what we've created. On either side you've got a selvage, and now you can put together a yukata or a kimono. You see how sheer that is, but it's great for the purpose of the course. Oh, it is so lovely to sew with this file. It's like sewing air or sewing a cloud. It's just gorgeous, and it really does show what we're doing. Oh, look at that. You can see here on my thumb, half, and then 1/2 centimeter, full centimeter, and then it's sewn along. And I've sewn it with an edge stitch along there. You could sew it a couple of millimeters in. You could, but you just want to make sure that you catch both the turn under and the other turn, so everything's encapsulated, and it looks gorgeous. Look at that. So within the garment, from the outside of the garment, you're not going to see any of this. This is the seam. This is part of the seam allowance. Within the garment, it's turned over, and from the outside, well, from the outside on this you will see, but on this one you can't see it. It's all within the garment. So I have a garment that has been made in this style, and I showed it earlier in my examples of what I've made. So this is the cotton lawn yukata that I made, one of my favourite pieces that I ever made, and I'll show you here the finished seam. So it's pressed out, so here's one side and here's the other side of the seam. So once they're put together, they're sewn together like this. So you see there's a line of stitching here and a line of stitching here. This is the seam and this is the turn under, and then that's pressed flat, and so they're the seams, and you basically you don't see them because they're just beautiful pressed and turned seams there, and you've got the line of stitching down the middle. So that's the inside of the garment that we're looking at, remember. This is the outside. It's just a seam. Straight down here. So it doesn't actually affect the outside of the garment at all. What it does is it affects the inside of the garment. You can finish the edges with an overlocker or a serger, depending on what you call it, and you can do it with a zigzag stitch. I did this earlier. I don't have an overlocker, I never use them, but you can finish the edge with an overlocker. I did this with the zigzag stitch, and this is where you catch the edge of the fabric with the needle just passes just beyond the fabric and comes back, and it catches all the threads. You can see here you still do get a little bit more flyaway with this method, but if you trim that, it will look fine. And then it keeps focusing on my face, I'm sorry, there we go. So you can see that is absolutely fine. And if you turn that under, that would be what your seam allowance would look like within the yukata. And that is absolutely passable. If that was overlocked, that is absolutely fine as well. Absolutely fine to overlock, do what you like, that's alright. But what you need to know is that you are finishing the raw edges of single layers of fabric before you put the garment together. You are not finishing the seams after you've put the garment together. So you're not overlocking two pieces of fabric together, you're overlocking one piece of fabric, and you're doing it all before you've sewn the seams. And the reason for that is called Miyatsuguchi. Now, this is covered in the PDFs. I have illustrations and everything. This was the most complicated thing for me to get my head around when I started learning about kimono, yukata and Japanese style garments. I'll show you the inside first. So here we have, this is Miyatsuguchi. This is where the sleeve meets the body, and it goes up over the shoulder there. So this is the shoulder, this is the katayama and the sodayama sewn together, and then underneath the arm, if I turn it out now, there is, I'll put my arm through as if I'm wearing it. Do you see this? This is the side seam starting there. This is the front of the garment. This is the back of the garment. Front of the sleeve. This is the back of the sleeve. And it's a hole underneath. And look, the sleeve is left open on the side seam side of the sleeve as well. So there's an opening under the arm. This is made for ease when dressing in kimono. It's only on women's kimonos, and it's used so it's easy to put on an obi and easier to dress. When you are actually dressing in kimono, it's very useful to be able to get your hand in here, because there's lots of ties that are happening underneath the kimono and lots of moving around the kimono that makes this a lot easier. A men's obi is tied around the hips, so not up here, it's tied down here around the hips. It's very simple, and there aren't lots of things. The accessories for an obi, for a woman's kimono, the list is endless. It goes on and on and on. There are bits of card, and there are ties, and there's a pillow. There's something called the obi makura, which makura means pillow. So there's a little pillow to make the beautiful knot at the back stand up. There's all kinds of things. But this is what the Miyatsuguchi is. So from the outside you can see there's an opening. And the inside, this is why we are treating the seams the way we are. You have to have the seams on the side seam. They have to be pressed open, because they have to open for the Miyatsuguchi, and then they have to open where they meet the sleeve. Because if you try and close this with, I've done it with a French seam, and what happens is you've then got a French seam that has to split, but then another French seam that splits, and then this part twists like this, and you end up with the raw edge sticking right out under the arm right here. There'll be a raw edge facing the front, and there are ways that you can twist it back, but you're always going to have a little twist or a knot where you're going to have to sever the fabric and turn it back. And it is, while it might seem easier to just close the side seam with a closed, a folded over seam allowance, it's not. It's much easier to treat your seams and then just press this open after you've sewn it. It might seem like a lot of work as you're getting ready to do it, but when you sew this side seam and just press it open, it's like a dream. It's so easy because you've done all your work beforehand. So that's why, that's the Miyatsu Gucci. In the PDF, there's a few illustrations that I've gone through with a like little magnifying glass, trying to show you what it is. Another great way to see it is to find yourself a kimono. Any kimono will have it, as long as it's a woman's kimono, or this is a yukata that has it as well. You've got one seam up here, you've got one seam down here, and there has to be a split in the middle, so everything has to be open. Now, to be honest, the centre back seam, it doesn't actually have to be open. If you want, you can French seam your centre back seam, because it doesn't have to be pressed open. It can just be sewn and turned to the side. If you really want, you can put it together and then finish the seam afterwards. The same goes for the okumi, the front extension, and the where it meets the front part of the body. That also can be done with a French seam, or it can be sewn and then treated afterwards. What I do, and what I've written in this pattern, is that we treat all the seams the same, so there's a lovely uniformity throughout the garment. So on my example that I have here, all the seams are treated the same, and it looks beautiful where it meets the hem. I hope you can see that. You've got the two beautiful turn seams there, they meet into the hem, and then round on the side seam it's the same, and then on the centre back seam it's the same. Back to the front overlap, the side seam, sorry, then the front meeting the front overlap again. And so they're all the same as you go around the garment. Also, I've sewn quite a few of these by hand. So all of this that I do to make enclose the raw edge, this has all been sewed down by hand. I've done that quite a few times. And once you've done that, so doing all this by machine, that is feeling the benefit, as we say here in the UK. You feel the benefit then, because you've taken the long way around and now you've found the short way by using a machine to do all of this. It makes the garment construction so easy once you get to it. Do not be disheartened. The way to do it is you do the biggest piece first. You always do the body first, get both of them done and out of the way. Then you do the sleeves, and you turn over the sides of both of the sleeves, and then you come in and do the front extensions and do both sides of them. And if you do it that way, the pieces are getting smaller and smaller, so each time you'll just go, oh, that was the end, and it's going to feel fantastic as you do it. Plus, the last piece is half width, so it feels a lot better when you then throw that onto an ironing board and you can press both sides at once under the iron. It's about these small victories in a big sewing in a big sewing project like this, but definitely do it that way. I once heard an analogy talking about writing a book. He said there's an Indian way and a Chinese way, and he likened it to cooking. He said when you're cooking in India, you chop up things very quickly and they all go into a big pot, and then the pot cooks for a very long time. So there's little preparation but a lot of cooking time. And he said then in Chinese cooking, you chop up everything for a very long time. Everything has to be minutely chopped up and chopped meticulously to make sure that it can all be picked up by the chopstick. But then you throw it in a wok and it's done in 2 minutes. This is the Chinese style. We are doing a lot of preparation, but when it comes to garment construction, you just whip it up and it feels fantastic. It's all done. It's really good. Well, that was a bit of sewing, wasn't it? And a bit of pressing, but we have done it. We have enclosed our raw edges. This is now time to mark the garment. Had you sewn a regular pattern before, you would have realised that we haven't really done any marking. We've marked the middle of a lot of pieces, as I'm sure you all have, because I've been extremely adamant that you have to. But we haven't done any actual marking of the pattern, and that is because we had to enclose those raw edges first. While I researched this pattern and I learnt how to make it myself and developed it, I used to clip like you would with your snips, into the pattern pieces straight after I'd cut them. I thought, okay, this is where the sleeves go, this is where this goes. And then I would go to enclose the raw edges, and I'd lose all my clips because they're only tiny little clips, and the chalk marks and anything I did got wrapped up in the raw edges, and it took me a few goes to go, hang on, marking has to come next. So there's a bit of back and front. We didn't measure our circumference until we'd cut the pattern. We're not marking the pattern until we've dealt with the raw edges, and the raw edges are dealt with before we actually construct the garment. So things are moving around, but it does make it a fantastic garment to sew. There are all these things, again, make it really easy when it comes to garment construction. All the preparation we're doing means when you whip this up, it goes up in a dream. Absolutely fantastic. So we need to mark the pattern.